Thank you for pressing start on episode 37 of Underplayed, KZUM's indie video game podcast. Today we have 2 secret games, followed by a review of our featured game, Superhot. Superhot. Here on Underplayed, we review indie games of all kinds, the games with small budgets, but big hearts, the lesser-known experiences with imaginative ideas. I'm Bo Po, and joining me is my player 2, playing games he wants to review. He's the Indiepedia with physical media. I'm talking about the start pressin', secret game guessin', holding your controller, DiscoCola. What is going on?
Nothing too much, Bopo, and I am ready to hand over control to you.
Oh!
How are you?
I'm doing just fine, my most innovative gamer I've seen in years. Those are references to our featured game, Superhot. This is our first FPS-focused featured game.
Yeah, there's not too many of those in the indie sphere, just in general.
No, I was looking at our list of approved featured games that we'll review and play someday. And we split them up by genre, and under the action category, there's not a lot of like FPS, first-person shooter games. It's a lot of like third-person action games and a lot of games that maybe you shoot guns, but there's also a lot of melee, and there is melee in this game, but also tons of games where it is just hand-to-hand combat or maybe more science fiction oriented. Mm-hmm. And then this is like the closest thing to what you would consider like a traditional FPS, but it has a very big twist. So that's, I think, what makes it so worthy of featuring on our show. We'll get to all that stuff in our review of Superhot. And I had played this game years prior, and I replayed it for this episode, so it's very fresh in my mind. My understanding is you had not played it.
Not even a little bit.
Not even a little bit.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that when we get there, but there were several reasons why I just didn't even consider it as an option. So
okay, yeah, so we can compare and contrast our experiences of playing it fresh and replaying it. And then DiscoCola, I wanted to ask you about Cult of the Lamb, which we featured early on in this season. It was our featured game for Season 4, Episode 1, and you have been tackling the DLC for Cult of the Lamb as well as chasing the Platinum. Did you want to tell us about that game?
Yeah, sure. The day we recorded that episode was the day before the DLC dropped. So
yes, it was the eve of the biggest expansion that game will probably get. Yeah.
We didn't even get a chance to try any of that stuff out. So that's just been a game that I've been going back to just when I have maybe only an hour to do some stuff. So I'll turn it on. And I'm happy to report that the DLC fixes some of the things that you had a problem with. However, at least on the PS4 version, those changes also introduce different performance issues. And again, this is the PS4 version, so it was a bit of a tit for tat for some unfortunate performance issue stuff.
You gotta maintain the balance.
Yeah,
of all that stuff.
Couldn't do it, but it does fix a lot of things that were really annoying about the base game, and it's a lot of fun, and I like the new challenges that it added to the game. I think it makes sense to have this as part of the game. However, it does make the game a lot harder, just even if you download the DLC and you haven't beat the game yet and access the DLC content, just the base game itself is now harder because of the changes they made.
Right. So my understanding is there are a lot more upgrades now, and the devotion that you would rack up in the base game to pay for everything, once you bought everything, you would start earning gold, and now that effect is either delayed or non-existent with the DLC.
Yeah, I don't think it exists anymore.
Because that was awesome, racking up 10,000 gold, and then I know I'm never going to be in want for gold again.
Exactly. That made so many things so much easier for me when we were reviewing Cult of the Lamb. And if I hadn't had all that gold in the first place, I would have had a much harder time.
Yeah. Well, any other changes you wanted to touch on specifically, like referencing our points from our first review?
Just the grid system for building your cult, much more easy to work with.
Oh, that's such a relief.
Yeah, it's still on that diagonal grid, but
Yeah.
it flows much better.
It snaps much more easily.
Yeah, absolutely.
Once there's like two different planes almost, and once you're on one plane, it's really hard to snap to the other on the base game.
It's
So
very difficult.
So people just now approaching Cult of the Lamb, you get Relics of the Old Faith, with the base game now, right? You don't have to pay anything extra. And so you can disregard some of these criticisms that we had in our first episode. We're already outdated on that review.
Immediately. So yeah, and then I got the platinum on accident, actually.
Oh.
All I needed to do was sacrifice X number of followers and just happened to do that on accident one day and
Nice.
got the platinum. That was all I needed. I still have DLC trophies, but
Okay.
platinum acquired.
Cool. Well, let me, since you did get the platinum in Cult of the Lamb,
I'm ready.
Let me just. I don't think that was the right one. There. Wait. Oh, that's the one we want.
There we go.
There we go. Yeah. So. Oh no, you don't get that one.
I don't get that.
I don't even know what that is. What is that?
That sounds crunchy.
That's if you don't get the platinum. Like you're really close. We'll still give you a little something, but. Congratulations on your achievement there.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So another thing I wanted to touch on was also indie game related, and it has to do with the recent PlayStation showcase that happened in May. And so this is where a lot of people had high expectations for PlayStation because I think it was the first what was called PlayStation Showcase in well over a year, maybe about 2 years. And so people were expecting tons of announcements. There were tons of announcements. It was a very long show. There were varying levels of reception to it after the fact. A lot of people were disappointed. A lot of people were whelmed, just right in the middle. I didn't see a ton of overwhelmingly positive feedback on the showcase. But I did think that for kind of a more niche audience, it was a great showcase for learning about some new indie games.
Yeah, I was very surprised to see any at all.
I know,
with
the
philosophy that PlayStation seems to have.
Yeah,
so.
Your expectation was really low. But this is a showcase for them to show games at all levels of development size and budget and things like that. This is the kind of showcase where we learned about Bugsnax and Stray and things like that. So here are some of the indie games that we learned about from the PlayStation Showcase. We had Sword of the Sea, which is from the creators of Journey, The Pathless, and Abzu, which will be our featured game next episode, actually.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really timely for us. We also saw the Talos Principle 2. This is the sequel to a game that is on our list of vetted featured games. So someday we will play the Talos Principle, which I've never touched in my life, but I think it's a first-person puzzle game. And so here we have a sequel. We also had from the studio that created Grease, and we know it's Grease because the developers have phonetically explained how to pronounce their name on Twitter. But from the creators of Grease, Nomada Studio revealed Neva or Neva.
Neva.
Neva. Are you going with Neva?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. I'm never going to know how to say that one. And then we have Cat Quest Pirates of the Caribbean. This is the third Cat Quest game, which I've never played a Cat Quest game before in my life, so but still looks adorable. We also got more gameplay on the Plucky Squire. This is one we've definitely known about for a long time. We've seen a couple of trailers and teasers, but we saw more of the dimension jumping in this game where you're going from the 2D sort of storybook look, and then you hop out and now you're in more of like a 3D platforming adventure sort of presentation. And this is from the developer All Possible Futures. Next, we got an announcement of Revenant Hill. And this is from a developer called The Glory Society, which is a new studio from the creators of Night in the Woods. And you could immediately tell this is from the Night in the Woods people because we see on screen this black cat that looks just like Mae Borowski from Night in the Woods.
With even the little notch out of the ear.
I know. So it is like her character design. And you're going, oh my gosh, is this Night in the Woods 2? And then she starts running along the ground like a cat. So it's weird because in Night in the Woods, all the animals are zoomorphized, right? They're basically humans that have an animal appearance, and they don't know they're animals. They like basically behave like humans. And so she's immediately running along the ground like a normal cat. And so you're going, what is this? Have the characters like devolved somehow? And it turns out that this is not Night in the Woods 2 necessarily. It's called Revenant Hill. It's got a cast of human and animal and mythical creatures. So it's not just this cat character. So very excited about that one. And then we have Ultros, which is a really psychedelic-looking Metroidvania from this new Swedish studio called Hadok or Hadoke or
I would
I'm
say
not sure.
Hadoke.
Hadoke?
That's how I would say it.
Yeah, so Hadoque. So what indie from this recent PlayStation Showcase caught your eye?
I'm really excited about Neva. I think their art style is incredible, and I just know that there's going to be such beautiful music and just such artistry in that game if Greece is anything to go by. Hopefully something I'll be able to play with my wife again like I did Greece. So that would be a real treat. And Ultros, I'm always a fan of most Metroidvanias, and especially if you can do something really, really cool with it, I'm down. So those are the ones I'm looking forward to the most.
Yeah, Neva didn't have a lot of time in the showcase because there are tons of games to get through, but really made an impression with a very emotional moment. They kind of pulled like a Pixar where, you know, like an Up, like a Pixar's Up, where something really sad happens immediately. And so I'm kind of just drawn to that one because of how quickly I felt emotions with that one. I want to learn more about Revenant Hill the most, but I want to play Sword of the Sea the most. Because I love Journey. I'm excited to get into Abzu. I want to play the Pathless for this show eventually with you. And it looks like it's really far along, and it just looks really polished. So that is what I'm excited about. And that is all I wanted to cover up top.
Cool.
So we will move on to our secret games.
Secret games. Secret games. Secret games. Secret games.
In Secret Games, we each reveal an indie game we've been playing in secret, and then we review it. And we don't talk about what we've been playing to each other before this recording. This is a complete surprise. Why do we do the surprise? It's really just a novelty experience for DiscoCola and me. And, it's fun. It's fun to just kind of guess what the other person's playing. We can choose any indie game as long as we haven't reviewed it before on Underplayed. So we'll start with you, DiscoCola. Let the mystery be no more. Reveal your secret game for episode 37 of Underplayed.
My secret game comes from Long Hat House, and it is called Dandara.
Oh, I've heard of this.
Yeah.
Is this a Metroidvania?
It is. And
Yes.
I've just sent you that trailer, so I'll let you watch that while I go on.
Okay.
So, to be honest, the story of Dandara is a bit confusing to me. So I'm going to read a section of the Steam page so I get it right.
Sure.
The world of Salt hangs on the brink of collapse. The citizens, once free spirits, now stand oppressed and isolated, but not all is lost. For out of this ether of fear arises a heroine, a ray of hope, and her name is Dandara. Welcome to a unique 2D Metroidvania platformer full of mystical creatures and boundless exploration. Defy gravity as you jump across floors, walls, ceilings alike. Discover the mysteries and secrets hidden throughout the world of Salt and its diverse array of characters. Empower Dandara for combat and survival against enemies bent on oppression. And in general, all of that is very obvious and clear in the game, except for one thing. I still don't totally understand what Salt is. The wiki says it's just the name of the full map area. So that's what I'm going to go with moving forward. But that did not become clear to me playing the game. Dandara, like we alluded to, is a 16-bit style Metroidvania, and as I mentioned before, this game is a bit hard to talk about, and there aren't actually that many characters, so I'm going to do my best.
Okay.
In Dandara, we have Lazuli, and Lazuli kind of feels a bit like a goddess Or maybe she just has telepathy, but either way, Lazuli is who provides motivation and exposition. You can eventually meet her in person, but generally she just sort of like warns you about upcoming obstacles and tells you about what is happening with the evil Eldarian army. There are also two minor protagonists, one named Thomas, who is named for the composer, and Tarsila is how I'm going to say it, an artist who is named after a famous Brazilian painter. And these two are mostly, they just sort of act like keys to open doors. I should note here also that this game comes out of Brazil. That's going to be important. There's also someone named Johnny B. He gives you missiles. That's it. Like Metroid-style missiles, essentially. There are some grander, less human characters. Augustus is one of them. He's a large enemy and member of the Eldarian army. You sort of see him there in the trailer. He's the giant face that's attacking Dandara. There is the writer. He is mysterious, maybe a god. I don't understand his thing. And then speaking of the Eldarian army, the primary antagonist is Eldar, and his goal seems to be oppression, isolation, and division of the citizenry. His domain and minions are all like decked out in massive amounts of gold, so there's also some poor distribution of resources in this world, probably by force. So I think that's where the main motivation and parallels to real life come in. And then lastly, there is Dandara. And I have quite a bit of confusion about her and her relationship to the world at large. When you start the game, it seems like she's just sort of born out of nothing. But there are also characters that know who she is before they even meet. So I don't totally understand what is happening.
In the description for the trailer you sent me, it says, quote, in a bizarre universe where the oppressed are on the brink of oblivion, Dandara has awoken to bring balance to this directionless world. Is that part of what you read just a second ago?
No, it's not.
Okay, so it says she's awoken.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's, super unclear to me.
Yeah, so is that born? Is that like preconceived?
Who knows?
Just waking up?
But trying to read up on it, I did learn a little bit about the origins of Dandara's name and the greater point of the game. And so here is what is on the fandom wiki.
Okay.
Quote, Dandara was a female leader of the Quilombo dos Palmares, a community or war camp of escaped slaves in the modern-day state of Alagoas. In her life, she fought alongside her husband Zumbi and many others to end slavery and ensure the freedom of many Quilombos scattered around Brazil at the time. Though much of her life is unknown, many historians agree that upon her arrest on February 6th, 1694, she committed suicide rather than return to a life of slavery. Powerful Brazilian influences throughout the years have made attempts to erase the racial injustices and slavery from the country's name, calling Brazil free of racism. But Long Hat House's choice of opening line, Dandara's actions will not be forgotten, cements the game's role as a historical art piece, paying homage to the struggles of Dandara and many other warriors scattered throughout Brazil's history.
Wow. So this has like cultural and historical significance.
Yeah.
With like the story going on and these characters.
Yeah, and the way that they introduce that line, Dandara's actions will not be forgotten, is sort of like really subtle too, because it's on a screen that also is telling you about the autosave feature. So it's like,
whoa,
oh, don't worry, Dandara's actions won't be forgotten if you turn off the game. But also it's like, hey, slavery existed in Brazil. Dandara's actions will not be forgotten.
Whoa,
so
yeah.
Very cool.
That's powerful.
And I'm so glad that I had to look at the wiki because I would have never known that. And that's so cool. But yeah, that's really all the characters in the game, at least all the ones that I can recall. There is an expansion to this game called The Trials of Fear, and I don't totally know what is in that quite yet, but I imagine there's at least mention of one or two more characters in that, and maybe more about Dandara in there, but I don't know. So, future update on that, I'm sure. So now, Bopo, I'm very excited to talk to you about the most innovative Metroidvania I've ever played.
Whoa! That's a big saying, mister.
Yeah, references aside, there is actually so much going on here that I've not seen done in any other game. First and foremost, the movement in this game. Remember when we talked about Forma 8 and how it is like technically a Metroidvania, but didn't really have the feeling because the Forma doesn't jump,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Dandara, you don't jump, like not in the traditional sense. You can only move at an angle from one white piece of ground to another white piece of ground.
Yeah, it basically looks like you're grappling.
Yeah.
You're not using a grappling hook.
Right,
But
and you're not swinging on anything.
You're drawing a line to something and then you're jumping to that and then sticking to that platform.
Exactly.
No matter what direction it's
Yes.
facing. Yeah.
So being airborne is not in Dandara's natural moveset. Apart from this, Dandara has a projectile attack. You have to charge it up first for it to really do anything, and its range is pretty limited. You also have a good number of upgrades to collect. These include the missiles I was talking about. You also get access to lasers and sort of like a bouncing energy ball. You can also pick up currency called Pleas of Salt, Pleas. And these are like a currency that you can use to upgrade Dandara's health, magic, and purchase the equivalent of E-tanks for both of those. There are some other passive unlocks that allow you to progress to different parts of the map just by possessing the upgrade. And of course, there are different kinds of enemies littered throughout Dandara. You can see a lot of those in that trailer. And additionally, because Dandara doesn't jump in the traditional sense, and her jump only has a limited range, there are certain like specified zones that will increase your jump distance. These sort of act as like one-way doors in a way.
Yeah, that reminds me of stuff from like Grapple Dog, where you're just on a launch platform at some points, and there's a point of no return.
Same idea.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly the same idea. There's also special platforms that will rotate based on what direction you fire your charge shot while you're standing on them. So they will rotate based on the force you exert. And in a very, very condensed nutshell, that's Dandara.
Yeah. I'm watching this trailer and there's just a ton of kineticism, a ton of perspectives that Dandara can take. The world is rotating.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nuts.
It's great. So I want to start by getting into things about Dandara that I like. So first and foremost, pretty much everything. I really like Dandara a lot. I think this game is stellar. This gameplay feels so good. And you know me, like my maining PlayStation actually has a lot to do with just using the D-pad. Like D-pad has a lot to do with why I prefer PlayStation over everything else. But in this game, D-pad doesn't really like work. But it doesn't matter. You would think that something like that would slow me down, but the physics in this game are so intelligently designed that you have a pretty significant margin of error when you're moving quickly. Like you can get into a flow and zoom so quickly around the map, but the game also rewards you for being more careful. Like you can run into danger if you choose to go fast, and it feels great, but if you go slow, it feels just as good, and you're rewarded for being more careful. Sound effects and subtle vibrations in the controller provide really incredible feedback. The boss fights in this game, that's another thing I really love. They are very few boss fights, but they are spectacular in many meanings of that word. Like they are spectacles to behold. And when you combine that with the way that Dandara has to move in this game, it creates such incredible and innovative boss rooms. So you just have like these sprawling boss rooms, but it makes sense. Whereas like other games like a Mega Man, you're confined to a room, just one room.
Did it kind of remind you of the larger scaled back bosses in Axiom Verge?
A little bit.
Where you're used to seeing kind of tiny corridors. They're all kind of the same size. And then it just, everything scales down. And now it just feels more epic.
Yeah, you get a little bit of that.
Yeah, okay.
But it's even more innovative just because of how you have to move. It's so cool. The entire map layout is really heckin' rad. With just a couple of exceptions, everything feels really cohesive together. And not only that, but the location of one of the primary zones adds so much to the story and significance of the overall motivation. Additionally, the map makes it very clear which rooms have which obstacles in them, so you don't have to waste your time exploring a room that might have maybe a large gauntlet of enemies just to find that you can't progress at the end because you don't have the right upgrade. So the map system is really doing a lot of work for you. The upgrade system in this game is awesome. You get to upgrade health and magic with Pleas of Salt. You get to choose which of these 4 stats you want to upgrade, but after each individual upgrade, the cost for the next one grows. And the cost increase does seem excessive at times, but as you progress through the game, you also gain access to stronger enemies, and the stronger enemies drop more Pleas of Salt. And it's scaled in such a way that you can tell it's getting more difficult, and you do eventually sort of feel that cost inflation, but it doesn't totally get to the point where it feels insurmountable. And so I think that's really intelligently scaled. There were times in this game where I'd say, dang, I wish I could do this with Dandara. And sometimes I would find an upgrade that would do that. And that's really satisfying. The pixel art in this game obviously is so beautiful. That's one of the first things you notice when you turn on this game. I love the shading style. There are loads of repeated elements, but it never feels lazy. And it feels more like a love letter to the best games that came out of this 16-bit era. Every area just has so much life. There are even zones that feel so sufficiently creepy, and every color palette of each zone seems to have all of the correct color choices. The UI is clear and concise, with one exception: everything you ever need to remind yourself of is present on the screen, and none of it interferes with visibility. Even the load screen is very clear about what you've collected and may even hint at how much you might still be missing without spoiling anything.
Oh, man. That's awesome.
And the music, Bopo.
Yeah.
The music is incredible. I love this music.
Oh, my gosh.
Thomas Kaufman, he heckin' nailed it. The music sounds like hope and despair. It sounds like struggle and accomplishment. It sounds like horror when it needs to sound like horror, and natural beauty when life is springing from devastation. It's just so good.
Is any of it Brazilian sounding? Is it particular,
I don't know.
Do you know?
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know enough about Brazilian music to make that assessment. I know some Brazilian jazz, but that's about it.
Sure.
Yeah. For now, this game is in my top 100 games list, which I just finished pretty quickly on the GG app.
As of
finally.
recording, just a few days ago,
Yeah.
you got that done. You got to 100. And so this is pretty. I remember seeing this game in that list, actually.
Yeah.
I don't remember what placement it was.
Well, and I've even moved it from the mid-50s where I had it. Once I started writing my notes, I actually moved it up to number 37.
Nice.
So it's currently sitting between Mega Man 4 and Digimon Rumble Arena 1.
Okay, so it's very high up in your list.
Yeah, I haven't done Trials of Fear yet.
Sure.
So stuff like that could shift in either direction, because I do have some dislikes, and I could see something called Trials of Fear compounding some of those dislikes.
Okay.
So moving on, the first thing I dislike is this. There are some of those minor enemies that are just a little bit too strong. They show up in late game areas, but if you have more than one of those difficult enemies on the screen at a time, you can get into hot water really quick, and they do just a little bit too much damage, in my opinion. The next thing I don't like quite as much is, at times I feel like I have a lack of direction. I can wander the map and sort of wade into areas that are extremely challenging but manageable, just to find that the necessary equipment to do anything at the end of that pathway, I don't have. So I can't actually accomplish the goal of that zone.
That's another reminder of Axiom Verge for me.
So that just means that I have to backtrack through difficult area that I just cleared. And that's sort of the nature of Metroidvanias that don't actively hold your hand, but it happened a couple too many times, I think. At some points, there is a forced camera rotation. And while this does serve a purpose, I believe, when you reach zones that are maybe taller than they are wide, this could be harder to navigate on something like a 16:9 display. So it rotates to give you maximum terrain visibility. However, when I reach these points while I'm sort of more focused on navigating and using the map, I can become pretty disoriented really easily, because suddenly up is now west and down is east. And so that can be hard to navigate, but that's that's more of like a neutral complaint just because it's my poor sense of direction at play here. Another neutral complaint is that the rumble in the controller goes absolutely nuts on the title screen.
What? On the title screen?
On the title screen. If
Okay.
my controller is just sitting on the table when I boot the game, you get a lot of I'm like, oh God.
What? Why?
I don't know,
So
man.
weird.
It is weird. But the last complaint I have with Dandara is with the upgrade called Rock of Remembrance. This upgrade is 100% necessary to activate certain platforms and essentially bringing parts of the stage back to life. But it also brings back certain traps as well. Traps that were previously harmless or inactive. So while I need this to get around, as a whole, it actually kind of feels like a punishment for progressing.
Yeah.
So except for the fact that I need it to get to unattainable areas, I actually feel worse off for having this upgrade. And
Yeah, you got to stay on your tippy toes.
yeah,
a
I
little
often
bit.
wish that I didn't have it. So I've never really encountered a necessary item that actually felt more like a curse, at least not without like boosting your attack power by a ton or something. So this is actually my biggest complaint about the game is that I don't like this upgrade. Dandara is truly a work of art in almost every facet. It takes just a small change to the Metroidvania formula, and that change results in one of the most interesting Metroidvanias I've ever played. The only thing that stops me from the constant urge to play this game is certain points of difficulty. Looking at all of my secret games that I'm currently expecting to play for this season, I can't imagine there will be one that I want you to play more than Dandara.
Okay.
I felt challenged. I felt inspired. I learned a little bit about Brazilian history, and I look forward to completing everything in Dandara except for maybe the speedrun trophies. And even then, though I'm likely to fail at those a lot, I will still enjoy controlling Dandara the whole time. I'm so excited to recommend this game to people moving forward. I give Dandara a 9.0 out of 10.
Oh, amazing. I actually expected a 10.
Ooh.
But because of how positively you were talking about it. But that is a very high score from DiscoCola. There's so much to react to here because, you're getting the educational experience. It's reminding me of other games that have educated us about certain things like 1979 Revolution Black Friday and learning about the Iranian Revolution through that game. And it's like, that is such a powerful new way to learn about a culture, a country, a certain character in history. And so I'm glad you got that out of this game in maybe a way you didn't expect. I was just curious about the world rotating, that whole aspect of the game. You're controlling that whenever the world rotates, or it's kind of predefined?
That's, predefined
Okay,
at certain
gotcha.
points, happens out of your control.
There are some games where that is sort of the central gameplay gimmick, and here it's just a thing that's thrown in every once in a while, and it's kind of surprising the player because the player isn't inputting that action. But just that idea of the world rotating, it's been explored so many times, but it reminds me of two games I've played called And Yet It Moves and The Bridge.
Okay, I've never heard of either of those.
And those games are are much more relaxed in pacing and theme and emotion. So like, don't expect an action heavy Metroidvania when you play those games. They're more puzzly. They're more meditative and reflective. But I just think that's fascinating when that is used in games. And then another thing I wanted to ask you about is, sometimes you pick secret games that have a little something to do with our featured game.
Mm-hmm.
So our featured game this episode is Superhot. In your mind, is there something that's reminding you of Superhot in this game or vice versa? There's such different gameplay-wise and just appearance-wise.
Yeah.
But is there anything that you thought thematically kind of crossed over?
I know that there was, but for the life of me, now that you're asking me, I can't remember what the connection is.
So a very light synergy this time with you.
Whatever it was, I
Sure.
don't remember it.
Yeah.
I know when I planned it, there was
Cool.
synergy.
Okay, and then what platforms is this
All
on?
right, Dandara is available on Android, iOS, Linux, macOS, Windows, Xbox One, and even though I have the super rare games Nintendo Switch physical, I played it this time on PlayStation 4.
Wonderful.
So everything.
Well, thank you for kind of doing my homework as far as figuring out what my jealous game should be for
You're welcome.
this season.
It could change, maybe.
It could change.
It's up to you. You have agency.
I think it has a shot, but we still have a lot of episodes to go this season, so we'll see. It is time for my secret game. My secret game is one that I bet there's a good chance you've heard of, and it's called The Pedestrian.
I have not heard of it. Let's check out this trailer, though, see if it visually is familiar.
Yeah, so The Pedestrian is a puzzle platformer first released in 2020, so not too long ago, and it was later ported to more platforms these past few years.
Yeah, this does not look familiar to me, but I'm
Okay.
interested.
Okay, yeah. It was developed and published by Skookum Arts, which is a really fun name.
Skookum.
Skookum.
Oh, Skookum Space Arts. Got it.
Yeah, no, yeah, I said it really fast. Yeah. So not Skookum Arts, Skookum Arts.
Sounds like a cookie. Anyways, go on. I'm sorry.
So I will read the About This Game section from the Steam storefront. Quote, "The Pedestrian is a 2.5D side-scrolling puzzle platformer. You are the pedestrian. Enter into a dynamic 3D world with stunning graphics and challenging puzzles. You play by rearranging and reconnecting public signs in order to explore and advance through each engaging environment." End quote. That, I think, is really descriptive. There's the normal game synopsis, which more mysteriously reads, quote, "I can see the signs in my sleep now, always guiding me closer. Will this really work? Have we almost achieved the impossible?" End quote. So I thought that was very insufficient. So I scrolled farther down on the Steam page. So basically, this game is about controlling this monochromatic stick figure, like you would see on a restroom sign, you know, and this stick figure traverses signage. So street signs, traffic signs, and you're mostly in these urban and cityscape environments. And there are really two distinct forms of gameplay that you're switching back and forth between. The first, very apparent one, is the platforming, where you're running, you're jumping, you're interacting with buttons and switches. Sometimes the switches activate doors. You're picking up keys that open doors. You're picking up other items that let you progress. And then the other side of the gameplay is the puzzle mode, which is where you pause the platforming and you take a step back and you look at all the signs that are sort of around the sign that you were just looking at. And you're deciding how they should connect to each other so that you can go from one sign to the next. And so signs usually have doors and ladders that can be connected, and that lets you transition between different signs. So in puzzle mode, what this looks like is looking at a door on one side and drawing a line from that door to a door of another sign. And so if you have a sign with a door on its right side, you can connect that door to another sign with a door on its left side.
Ooh.
And now you can go from left to right.
Clear, concise rules. Love it.
Mm-hmm. The signs can also be picked up and moved around. So the layout of the signs is not necessarily correct when you reach a new puzzle. There will be just an arrangement of signs. And sometimes you need to have a different orientation. You need to move them around, shuffle them around to figure out, what the right path forward is. And then to use doors and ladders, when you make those connections, the flow of the signs is very important. So if you're moving from a sign on the left to a sign on the right, that means the pathway of the doors matters. You can't just flip the signs around the opposite direction and expect that door to work. So sometimes you temporarily rearrange signs and then their doors don't work and then you have to rearrange them back. So the movement, the direction that you're moving has to make sense with the direction of the signs, if that makes sense. And so really it's a game about finding the right combos of connecting the signs and which signs should you explore first, which signs are at the end of the chain of events. And so there are many mechanics introduced throughout the game. There are boxes that you push, and then those add a little platform that you can use to get onto higher platforms. Some signs have cutouts in them, and if you overlap that sign with another sign, you can use that cutout to basically enter the sign underneath in a way that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. They introduce electricity at one point, and you need to use wire to make a path for the current to flow. And then there's also like paint, which lets you preserve a sign even if like a puzzle resets. In this game, if you start making paths and you start traversing between signs, if you then disconnect a ladder or a door, you reconnect something, it'll actually reset the entire puzzle. But they introduced this paint that allows you to preserve one sign at a time, or sometimes two signs at a time, so that even if you reset a puzzle, those two signs remain how they looked. And you're kind of like squinting because it's a lot to take in.
Yeah, that's hard for me to picture in my head.
I had the controller in my hand and I was watching the game, and it's hard to pick up on some of this stuff. And the game is mostly 2D side-scrolling, but where the game becomes 3D is in its realistic environments surrounding the signs. So the signs are very simple in their graphical approach, but around all that, there are tons of streets and buildings and statues and trellises. And so everything feels very urban, very city-like. And the game is completely wordless in speech. There are words in the city environment. You'll see names of restaurants.
Yeah, I
and
saw a
things.
gym. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But the game isn't ever talking to you, so a lot of information is visual. There's iconography, and you just learn what iconography means through just experimentation, and it happens pretty quickly and pretty intuitively. But I will talk about what I liked with the Pedestrian. The Pedestrian looks quite simple on the surface, but there's a great amount of challenge here, which I always appreciate. I don't want to just steamroll through a game and not be challenged by it, especially when it's a puzzle platformer. And so there are 8 chapters, and each one is introducing a new concept or a new gimmick, and none of them outstay their welcome. So you're getting this really steady flow of like new mechanics, new things to experiment with. It'll introduce an idea, and then the next 4 or 5 successive puzzles will take that idea and play with it. A lot like Baba Is You, And then once you're done with that collection of levels, that chapter, you're moving on to another idea. And the difficulty is a pretty straight line upward where things are getting harder and harder. But those mechanics changing kept things fresh. That's what I really cherish about like the progression of this game. And then some puzzles took me around like 20 or 30 minutes, which you might not be able to anticipate based on just looking at the trailer. But these puzzles can be really rewarding when you figure them out. So I tried my best not to look up anything in this game. I think I did look up a few things. But overall, I was very rewarded with finally finding the combination of signs and the pathway I was supposed to take. So the game is not a pushover. Some of the puzzles have so many variables that there are a few possible solutions.
Okay.
And it's not like, I am not saying at all that I discovered those alternate solutions, but I did some research after, and the developers confirm in a few spots in the game. I watched a playthrough where they were watching a speedrunner and they were breaking down the strategy, and they have so many variables in there that, you might discover a solution that works for you. I might discover something else.
That's cool.
And then the presentation and visuals are amazing. I kind of expected them to be cool, but this is phenomenal visuals going on. So like the signs are really simple and uncomplicated, but I'm talking about everything around them. You don't see humans other than like cars driving around. So you're not seeing like a ton of life in the game, but there's so much detail. It all feels very lived in. And there's great fidelity too in the graphics. And it has this level of polish and set decoration that's comparable to something like Stray. And you remember in Stray, one of my big praises was this game just has an art direction and everything feels very thoughtfully placed. And there are just so many assets. Every single environment has a collection of items that feel unique to that environment. That's what's going on in the Pedestrian.
Yeah, I have the trailer paused on just like this ivy growing on a wall. And I mean, maybe some leaves are repeated, but I don't see like the same pattern of leaves on a branch. You know, it just, so much attention.
Yeah, it was rare, if ever, that I noticed, this was used like 2 chapters ago. It just felt like I was always seeing new things. And so all these beautiful backgrounds, looked nice, but then they also have the effect of adding a nice contrast to the signs where the signage actually is standing out more because it just looks so different from all of the detail around it. So, and then the music in the Pedestrian is phenomenal.
Yes.
The music has no right being this lively, being this professional sounding, being this amazing. So the soundtrack is like really orchestral and jazzy and acoustic in parts. And all of it had this very optimistic feeling to it. I'm going to name drop Pixar for a second time this episode, but it has what I call the Pixar soundtrack feel to it.
Okay.
I don't know if that conjures anything in your
my
mind.
head. Yeah, I have a sound going on.
Where it's a soundtrack that sounds epic. It sounds like there's a lot of instrumentation. It sounds like the arrangement is very thoughtful, but it's also really wholesome. It's music that's very easy listening. And so I give a huge shout out to Logan Hayes, who is the composer and the sound designer of this game. And then also something I like about the Pedestrian is where it ultimately goes by the end. And it's mostly the idea of what it explores. This game has one of the most brilliant ideas for a surprise in its final chapter of any game we've played. My mouth was agape when I reached chapter 8 of the Pedestrian. I know you are not familiar with this game, but sometimes you do watch playthroughs of games that you haven't played. If you are interested in the Pedestrian at all, I implore you, do not look up anything about this game. I don't want you to get spoiled about what happens. I want you to play it yourself if you're at all interested. The game does something that reminds me of an indie game we've reviewed before.
Okay.
As well as an indie game that we've vetted as a featured game that I don't even want to mention, because I think even just mentioning these games might be a slight spoiler. What I want to do, though, is in our season 4 recap and reflection episode, when we talk about our surprises, at the end of this season, I will probably name drop those games. I'm just giving you a warning ahead of time in case, just so that I can address it at some point.
So what you're saying is finish this game quickly.
And I'm also saying I already know this will make one of my surprises.
Okay.
It'll make my surprises list. And it's not like I am spoiling the whole ending, when I do that, but I will be doing that. I did have dislikes with the Pedestrian. I've been very positive on it, but there are some overarching problems I do have with the game. In practice, that last chapter, I love the idea of it. It reminded me of cool things. I liked the swing they took, but it also feels like that part of the game needs some tuning. I found the execution lacking a certain amount of reward for what it was introducing. The end also hints at this story that feels like a lot is thrown at you, and the previous 7 chapters don't really have that. So it's like this story experience that kind of comes out of nowhere.
Okay.
So different people will have different reactions to this, where if you like the idea of being surprised with like a hidden meaning and then it's open to interpretation, you'll have a lot to dissect at the end of the Pedestrian. But for me, it was such a jarring kind of surprise that I didn't really gel with it. I love that they took a swing at the end. It was better than having like a more boring ending. But I just didn't really click with it, unfortunately.
That can happen.
Yeah, it's like an ending that's vague, ambiguous. I don't care to theorize about what it means. And then I have some problems with the gameplay, specifically when you're like dragging the signs to keep the flow of the doors and the ladders. That can sometimes feel like busy work because some puzzles make you rearrange the signs several times, which means you're breaking the links between several doors and ladders. And then you have to go back and fix those if you need to traverse those again. And so there's just moments where you're switching a lot.
I could see people calling that artificially padding out the game.
It does feel a little bit like that. I get that they want to maintain that directional flow of things, but I kind of just wish once 2 doors were connected, no matter where those signs are, I can always use those doors. And overall, I just didn't like going into puzzle mode as much as the platforming. I want to enjoy both halves of the game equally, and I just found the platforming to just be more, traditional and my thing. And while the wordlessness is really consistent and confidently done, some of the concepts end up being poorly explained as a side effect of this. So the paint mechanic I talked about a moment ago, that made no sense to me until I looked it up online, honestly. That was the only one I did that with, but I did have to do that here. And then in general, I couldn't play this game for more than 1 or 2 chapters at a time. And by the halfway point, I found the game to be like really fatiguing, and I wish I could have marathoned it, but there were 2 factors that made marathoning it impossible for me. So one is that the puzzles become very complex. The Pedestrian becomes about creating a chain of events in your head as you're staring at all the signs in puzzle mode.
Okay.
So this is another place where it reminded me of Baba Is You, because you're looking at the entire screen and you have to think, okay, sign A leads to sign B, and B leads to C, and C leads to, and on and on and on until you hit like J. So it's not a game about, A leads to B. You have to figure out A leads to J. And if you make this whole chain of A to J and then something doesn't work, it takes a lot of mental energy to find the malfunctioning link in all of that.
Yeah.
And then the chain has to be reworked. And if you push something else ends up getting pulled. And so this can get really complicated when there are lots of mechanics going on at once. There is one screen I remember where I had to direct electricity, and there were 7 signs, which is a lot of signs for one puzzle. And as the electricity was getting pumped through the puzzle, the environment around the signs was changing, and I was able to then move signs to places I couldn't move them before. And I had to reset the puzzle multiple times to make progress. That was mandatory to get through
That's a couple
that puzzle.
too many variables.
It's a lot going on at
Yeah.
once. And so that's one of the ones that took closer to 30 minutes for me to complete. And that's just one puzzle.
Yeah.
And so just complexity, just the overarching area of complexity is why this game is hard for me to marathon. The other big one is that the monochromatic nature of the stick figure and the platforming, everything starts to blend together because of that look. So I love this aesthetic. They commit to it really well. It's inspired, but just a natural side effect of that is that all the objects and your character and lines and platforms, they just start to blur together because they're all the same color.
Okay.
I feel like I was using more brain power to differentiate all that stuff in my mind when I saw everything on screen. So it's a lot of the same color going on in all these signs after signs after signs. So the game just overall is pretty fatiguing for me to the point where I can't play it too long. And then minor quibble, the game has no platinum trophy on PlayStation. So boo.
Bummer.
But, the Pedestrian is a tiring game that takes a big swing at the end with moderate success. I feel challenged by this game, and when I make progress, I do feel very smart. It has a gorgeous soundscape. I may never say this about another game, but visually, it's absolutely stunning in the periphery. And here, that's really all that matters, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10.
Okay, 7 out of 10 for the Pedestrian.
Yes, and it's playable on PC, Mac, Linux, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, which is where I played it, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X and S, with a Nintendo Switch version coming along at some point, allegedly.
Okay. Well, I don't have many questions about this game. First is, why the heck did they go so hard with the environmental stuff outside of the puzzles, man? That's impressive.
I don't know. I don't remember if they talked about that during the speed run I watched. They were mostly talking about the technique of going through the game quickly. But I appreciate that they did.
Yeah. I definitely had like a certain expectation, and they could certainly like go with less fidelity and it would still be
for sure
a perfectly good game.
This game could have such a simpler presentation with just those signs, and I think it would still work. But I just appreciated that level of polish and detail.
Yeah. My other question is, you talk about chapters and you talk about puzzles that can take upwards of 30 minutes.
Yeah.
how much of a chapter are puzzles like that? Like, are chapters pretty short? You know, just a couple of puzzles here and there.
Chapters might have around half a dozen what I would call like main puzzles, but then there are some like really short transition areas where you're going through several signs and it's very apparent. It's very easy to get to the next area. You're just like on your way to the next puzzle, and that puzzle has like maybe 3 to 7 signs in it. And I'd say every chapter has like half a dozen or so of those like main puzzles going on. And so like, I think this game took me between 4 and 5 hours. Some people will probably only do it in 3 to 4 hours.
I'm a little bit worse at these kinds of games and just take longer in general.
And again, I looked 1 or 2 things up. So if I tried to do those things on my own, I probably would have taken a lot longer. So yeah.
The only other thing is that it's weird, but this game, from what I can see, it reminds me a lot of Closure from our PS3 days.
Yeah, I never played it.
Yeah, and it looks nothing at all like that, but you're messing with like light to create platforms, and it's just got such interesting rules, and you have to think about A to J.
Yes,
you know, in Closure quite a bit. So really interesting that's the first thing I think of. Yeah,
no, I definitely. I mean, it is. It's a game I think you would appreciate, and I think you would. I recommend this to you. You know, you like these kinds of things. Again, like play it in a situation unlike mine where I had to get it done before today. You might even enjoy it more than I did because you're not feeling the pressure of getting it done. You can really take your time with those puzzles.
Although it sounds like you did give me a bit of a deadline here.
Yeah,
if
well,
I'm going to do it. But.
Again, that's not going to be a huge spoiler. It's mostly just like a little something to look forward to, I guess. Yeah, let's treat it like that. So those are our secret games, Dandara and the Pedestrian. Let's move on to our review of Superhot. It is our featured game. Superhot is a first-person shooter, first released in 2016. It was developed by Superhot Team, also published by Superhot Team. The game synopsis from the Steam storefront reads, quote, Superhot is the smash hit FPS where time moves only when you move. No regenerating health bars, no conveniently placed ammo drops. It's you alone, outnumbered and outgunned. Snatch weapons from fallen enemies to shoot, slice, and dodge through a truly cinematic hurricane of slow-motion bullets, end quote. That is actually one of the better synopses we've read. I think that basically covers it. Superhot starts with this presentation that resembles like an old computer screen, like a DOS-style computer screen. There are barely any graphics to start out. It's just text on screen. And there's like this antiquated file commander with folders and files. And your friend messages you and tells you about this program called Superhot.exe that logs you into this, quote, sick new shooter through a company's websites. And so your friend sends you the files to play Superhot, and you run this executable, and you get dropped into this virtual world where you're now in the first person and you're playing Superhot. And already within like 5 minutes of the game, there's this meta element going on where, you know, you, DiscoCola, are playing Superhot, but you're also technically playing a character playing Superhot.
Yes.
Or are you? You know, it's the game is filled with this notion of like identity and control. Who's in control? Are you being controlled? There's a lot of communication that starts happening between the player and this entity called the system, which is responsible for the creation of the game. And that's all I wanted to share about the story. If there's anything else you thought that was important, but it's pretty cut and dry, but it's also pretty ambiguous. Yes. Yeah.
It is also not that.
It is also not that. So basically there are things, and then there are things that are not those things. At the heart of Superhot is the shooting and the time slowing mechanic. So in the first level, you're told time only moves when you move, and you have this handgun, and you start walking, you turn around a corner, and there are these two guys who start shooting at you. But if you stop walking, they also stop walking. And if they have shot their gun, their bullets slow down. Nothing ever freezes completely in this game, at least in the base game. But it's so slow that it looks like things are like 3% speed, So you can still get hit by a bullet when you're standing completely still. It's just very slow that you can see the bullet coming. And if you get hit by one bullet, you die and restart the level. The levels are very short. They usually only take like a couple seconds once you get all of the movement of the enemies down and everything. But enemies also take one bullet to be defeated, and you can hit them in the leg. You can hit them in the shoulder, and
You don't
they'll
have
die.
to line up headshots.
No, you don't. So you can, but you do not have to. And if enemies get shot, or if they're hit with like a melee weapon, they shatter like glass. And you can also punch and throw objects at enemies. If you throw an object at an enemy, it makes them drop their weapon, and then you can grab it. If your gun runs out of bullets, you can throw your empty gun at an enemy to get them to drop their gun, and then you can pick up their gun, shoot it, throw it, and so on. So you can kind of chain together all these movements. And there are only 3 kinds of guns in the base game. There's the pistol, the shotgun, and the rifle. We have melee weapons like bats and katanas, and the levels are quite tiny in size. Usually there are only a few rooms, maybe an alleyway, a parking garage, things like that. And, visually, there are only 3 primary colors used in this game. The environments are white, objects that can be picked up are black, and enemies are red. And that's it. And if you defeat all enemies in a level, you're met with this voiceover that says, super hot, over and over. And you can watch a replay of your performance in real time. And then there are a few dozen levels amounting to just maybe 2 or 3 hours of game time, and then sprinkled throughout our story-focused levels with very little combat or maybe even no combat as well. So the first iteration of Superhot was created in 2013 at this event called the 7D FPS, which is an annual game jam of sorts where basically the challenge is to create a first-person game in 7 days. And so that's when the first version of Superhot came out. And then the game was well received in that first iteration. It was then kickstarted, and that's how we got the Superhot that we know today. And because of Superhot's success, we got Superhot VR, which I've talked about briefly before as having played. We also got Superhot Mind Control Delete, which uses like roguelike elements, and there's like permadeath in that game. I've not played that one, but it's a little bit different genre-wise. So DiscoCola, anytime we cover a new genre or a genre we don't cover a lot of, we sometimes talk about our history just overall with that genre. So I was just curious, what is your experience level and interest in first-person games where you do the shooty shoots?
You do the pew-pews.
Yes.
To be honest, like it's not totally my jam. Like unfortunately, during specifically like the PS3, Xbox 360 era, that's pretty much all there was out there, essentially.
It's a lot of what people talked about for sure. Yeah.
So I played BioShocks and I played Dead Space, which is a third person, but so that's my shooter experience essentially. It's like BioShocks, Dead Space, games that were big enough to care about in that era.
And BioShock is definitely like a single player, story-focused game. It's very atmospheric. That was one you and I really got into, and I consider that one a shooter, even though there are like, it's story heavy. You could argue there's light RPG stuff going on. A lot of people called that a shooter, and I agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So not a genre that you seek out a ton,
and even for a time was a genre that I disliked quite heavily. But, so that's sort of my experience with it. How about you?
Yeah, so I've never been a fan. There are so many different like areas of first-person shooters. There's like the competitive FPS games. I've never been that person, and I know you haven't either. I find the whole like competitive shooter thing, like the multiplayer shooter idea, I find it just really not my thing. I find it like uncouth. You know,
Yeah.
I don't want.
I'm not like a competitive person anyway.
Yes.
So it's just like,
Yeah. So I don't find enjoyment in trying to compete with others when it comes to shooters. But I love first-person shooters that are single player that tell a great story. And that can even happen in some games like Call of Duty games. Like I've liked a few of those games just for their single player campaigns. And I love BioShock, you know. So I definitely have experience playing them, but there's just a certain area that I don't touch. But here's Superhot. It is definitely single player focused. It has a twist where time is bending. It has, you know, kind of this meta element going on. So I wanted to now just ask you, what are your thoughts on Superhot?
all right. Well, Superhot, another game where I feel like maybe my thoughts will be pretty short, but I've also spoken at length having that perception before. So who knows? Before we started Superhot, I think I asked for clarification from you more than one time whether or not this was a VR-only game. And while there is VR now, this wasn't, you know, in the original version. And that is so wild to me because in my head, when I think of VR games, I think of Superhot. It looks like a VR game.
It does.
And so I had this like preconceived notion of how the game would control. I kind of assumed that it would be just like incredibly unruly.
And in the base game, the character that you're playing who's playing Superhot,
Oh yeah, he
is using
a VR headset, you're
to
right.
play Superhot.
I hadn't even made that
which
connection.
is like such a weird chicken egg thing that happened with this game.
Yeah.
And I think like they recontextualized the game when that VR version came out because a lot of people saw that on VR game storefronts and, you know, the connotation of Superhot changed a little bit with its VR version.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, I thought the controls would be a little unruly. As it turns out, the game does, in fact, feel a little unruly to me, a little erratic, which I would think would be better mitigated by this like time slow mechanic. But I still had a lot of like aiming based jank. I had multiple occasions where I was like very meticulous about setting up my aim. Well, and I'm always very meticulous about setting up my aim in this game, but specifically with like throwing things. I would throw the item and it would go off to the left of where my reticle was literally sitting right there, and often would crash into a wall and eliminate the item that I just threw.
Yeah.
And that happened so many times. And like I'm more forgiving with like bullet aim because I'm very used to missing my shots and I'm rarely like close enough to my target to judge whether or not I felt like it was a fair miss. But man, all of that is to say that one of my general thoughts is that I was often faced with these like small annoyances playing Superhot.
Yeah.
And this is too bad because I think the concept of the game loop is actually a really satisfying concept. This game is supposed to basically be bullet time the game, essentially.
Yeah.
Like it slows down time so that you can do all these really cool moves. And at the end, when it's run together at full speed, you're like cooler than John Wick.
Yes.
I think. I've never actually seen John Wick.
No,
but
it definitely is kind of like that. Well, another Keanu Reeves movie is The Matrix. The people
where bullet
are
time
reminded-
comes from.
Exactly.
Yeah, so
and that, you know, full speed summary of your completion of a level, that's sort of a reward
Yes.
at the end.
yeah, and that's cool. But I've always found the art style particularly compelling. I've been looking forward to at least watching someone play this. And again, I thought this was a VR-only game for a long time, so I wasn't super interested in playing it myself. But the look of the red dudes has always seemed super cool to me, and the way their character models shatter compounds that visual sort of crystalline appearance that they have. And I think that's really fun. In addition to that shattering effect, I think the feedback in this game is actually super satisfying. Landing hits with punches adds just the right amount of like start and stop to the time slow.
Yeah.
And
time kind of jumps forward a little bit when you do those like katana slices
you have
or
to,
throwing weapons.
Your arms are technically moving, so it has to line
represent
up.
that movement. Yeah.
And I think it's just the right amount of start and stop when you do those actions, and the shattering sound and appearance is so satisfying. And so I think that's where this game really shines the best. I think there's a really interesting moment in the game where the game provides direction for you to follow, but doesn't reward you for it. And I think this cleverly plants a seed where defiance could become a goal. But I feel like this seed doesn't really get to fruit.
Yeah.
But maybe it introduces a different meta element in the illusion of choice.
Oh,
But
yeah.
if this is the takeaway meta element, I don't totally think it nailed the concept because the game still acts like my character has agency and desire. So is this about obedience or is it about illusion of choice? I can't really tell.
Yeah.
Um,
And we'll get maybe more into interpretations later, which are the kinds of things I'm very poor at, but I'd be curious for your expanded thoughts on that if you have them later.
okay. Yeah. Superhot also makes it pretty obvious that there are secrets to be found here, but does it in a pretty subtle way. Now, what those secrets are, I don't know because, and this is my biggest takeaway, despite the spectacle of dispatching like dozens of these red dudes in a matter of real-time seconds, I did kind of find the overall game and gameplay loop to be surprisingly boring, actually.
Sure.
The game introduces new elements in an appropriate pace to sort of add flavor and new ways to approach levels, but it rarely does enough to keep me interested. And when you add that I find most of the set pieces to be pretty uninteresting, it kind of fails to leave this like lasting impression on me. Like even thinking back, trying to write these notes, I only kind of remember 4 or 5 levels. Like there's the one with the truck, the one with the bar and the billiard tables.
Yes. That was very memorable.
The one where you jump through that scaffolding right at the beginning.
Yes.
I remember that one. And then the one in the architecture office, which I really thought, stuck with me. And then that one that's like maybe the foyer to a mansion.
Yeah, I think it's called Ballroom or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I found most of the levels to be just shooting red guys.
Sure.
And that's sort of my ultimate conclusion here, unfortunately, is that I just didn't really enjoy myself too much here. I think Superhot, it's not at all a bad game, and I definitely didn't have any supremely frustrating moments like I thought that I might have, but I just didn't have too much fun.
Yeah.
And maybe some of those like X weapon only runs might make the game more interesting. Also, possibly the endless mode would feel more fun. But the main game as it is just didn't like do it for me. And I really enjoyed some of the, cool animations and the computer file mode more than anything, honestly. Like just the way they turned that into art was really interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Superhot has this weird thing about pausing the game where you can't pause the game. If you pause the game, it restarts the level.
Yes.
That is a huge complaint for me, and I actually accidentally had to restart the last level like 4 times because I
Dude.
had to leave the room.
It's like you're reading my notes. That happened to me. I got to that last level. That last level is a gauntlet,
Yeah.
really, because there are 3 or 2 checkpoints, I think.
Yeah.
And it's just a long level, and it's the most challenging level, in my opinion. And I forgot that pausing isn't a thing.
Yeah.
I also had to leave the room, and it went back to the home screen,
yeah.
and I was like, oh, I
Forgot.
shoot. And it
Yeah.
doesn't save your place. You have to
Yeah.
start over.
So you have to start all the way over. Well, I mean, like once you do it 2 or 3 times, it's like, well, it's not as hard to get back to where I was, but it's still annoying.
Yeah, I wish it warned you.
Yeah.
Are you sure you want to go back? But it would kind of break the illusion too
Mm-hmm.
of what's going on.
Just even if it's not like a pause, just like a different way to suspend
yes.
gameplay for a
Yes.
second.
Yeah.
I have children. I have to leave the room, my
Yes.
guy.
Yeah.
Anyways, ultimately, I think Superhot has a lot to offer for a lot of people, but playing this on my own didn't keep me interested in the game. I think this game has potential to be more fun as a party game where maybe you pass the controller or something that you stream. But even then, I don't know that I personally would want to stream it because then I'm either focusing on action or focusing on the chat.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anything wrong with Superhot, but apart from playing in endless mode, which you can sample a little bit on the last level if you're interested, and just focusing on shooting the red guys, I don't know that I'm super interested in coming back to this. But if you, Bopo, or anyone else out there loves Superhot, like I get it. I understand why
Yeah.
a lot of people like it, but for me, Superhot's kind of like a 6.0 out of 10.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably what I would have guessed for you. Yeah, so Superhot, I am replaying it for this episode, and I chose Superhot for this season in our season 3 episode 11 episode, and I liked to pick some games with some like unofficial categories. That's what guided my decisions, and Superhot was my pick for a game that I want to replay from my past because I remember liking Superhot, and so I'm happy to report that I still think Superhot is very fun with its small bursts of arcade strategy, is what I'll call it.
That's a good way to call
because
it.
you're constantly just looking around in different directions and making these dozens of decisions in a level sometimes that you normally wouldn't be able to make in a real-time first-person shooter.
Absolutely
where
not.
You're just running through a room and, I got shot. Oh, no. Here you're able to turn a lot more. You're able to shoot in this direction, turn 180 degrees, and now I can go pick up this object so I can throw it at this guy. So it lets you feel like you can do things that no other game has let you do in this from this perspective of first-person shooting. I think experimentation feels encouraged in a lot of levels. The levels, one, are short enough that time doesn't feel all that wasted if you fail, maybe with the exception of that last level, especially if you try to pause and you go back to the main menu. But once you master the levels, they don't take more than 10, 20 seconds to complete. And there are also objects and weapons in the environments that set up these situations where you're throwing a martini glass, at the guy behind the bar, and then they drop their gun, and then you shoot that gun at someone. It feels like they thought about what players will want to reach for and switching that up between throwing and shooting. I also like that paying attention to who's shooting you matters, because every gun needs a second to load the next bullet in the chamber before they fire again or something. And so this helps you determine who to dispatch of next. So if you're in a tight space with two people aiming guns at you and someone just fired a shot that you're dodging, you should probably shoot the other guy or throw something at the other guy because they're going to shoot you next.
And like the difference between weapons too, like some have shorter reload times. So
yes, like the assault
consider
rifle.
that,
Yeah. I want to get rid of the assault rifle guys very quickly because they can just keep firing at me. And also, each time I fail a level, I feel comfortable changing maybe one or two variables about my strategy to just see if I get any farther. And then I can quickly undo that and go back to what I was trying a second ago. So I'm taking an approach, I'm prototyping, I am just experimenting here and there, and sometimes it works out, and that feels good. And, FPS games are often about anticipation, like where will the person I'm trying to shoot go? Where will they think I'm going?
Mm-hmm.
And I love that whole idea is heightened in Superhot, where you're rewarded if you pay attention to enemy movement direction and their velocity before you stop moving. If you notice that an enemy was sprinting and you want to try to aim a bullet not at where they are frozen in time, but maybe 3 or 4 steps ahead of them, if you understand how fast they were going a second ago and you shoot a bullet that is spaced to the side of them, and then you turn around and go behind a corner, you might hear that shatter of the glass, and that's your indication that you did hit them, and you don't even have to look to see. And that feels so good. That's probably my favorite feeling in Superhot.
Yeah, cool guys don't look at explosions. Hopo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the feeling that's going on here, is like shooting that gun, and then just that's my decision with that guy. And now I'm turning to this direction and dealing with another guy. And then when I start moving again, I hear that shatter. I love that in Superhot. I love the glass shattering effects, the enemies dying. The visual of that is very dynamic. It always feels like it looks like it's never looked before if I hit someone in the thigh or hit somebody in the arm. Jumping is something that I played around with a lot more this time than the first time I played the game. Jumping, I found, unlocks this whole world of strategy because enemies have such a hard time of anticipating your next move when you jump in Superhot. And it's kind of hilarious. You feel like you're cheesing them.
Yeah.
And it can completely change your play style, but it's also not necessary too. So you can beat the game without jumping a whole lot. And I like that as well. I did have dislikes with Superhot. I also wrote down the word jank. I back you up on this. There is a little bit of jank in Superhot. Jank can work in your favor, but a lot of times it doesn't. Here's a way it works in your favor. I found that enemies can shoot shotguns, which just sends out a spray of bullets, and that might destroy an object, like a glass on the table that's sitting next to them, and the splinters of those objects might hit and stun the enemy, and you didn't even have to do anything in that instance, and so that's a little weird. And then, like, if an enemy is approaching you and you have a katana and you round a corner, you can just wait for them to come up to around the corner and you can slice them through the wall. I was doing that a ton in the katana only playthrough. It's like, I probably shouldn't be able to do that, but thank you for letting me do that. The jumping can feel a little heavy, but you can also land on vertical edges and sort of climb up things in nonsensical ways. That's actually how you reach a lot of secrets in the game.
Okay.
Which is something I also did. And then where it doesn't work in your favor, aiming melee hits. I agree, like it feels good to land a melee hit or a sword hit or something like that. But aiming them can be awkward because you need to aim your cursor over the enemy and then they need to be highlighted for the hit to register. You can't just like swing it wildly and as long as they're in the path, they'll get hit. You have to make sure they get highlighted. And sometimes they don't get highlighted right away and you have to kind of move the stick a little bit and then they get highlighted.
Yeah, and it's compounded, if there's like an item or object that they dropped, already. So like sometimes your reticle is stuck hovering over this item that you don't want to.
Do you want to grab this?
Yeah. I'm like, no, please.
No, yes. And then the game's story is nebulous. It feels like it's trying to be more profound than what it is. And I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to take away from the story. And I've now played this game twice, so it is a person gets sucked into this system and reality is not what it seems. That's basically what I take away from it. And I'm just left asking like, why? And maybe I am just really bad at interpreting this stuff, but it just feels shallow. It just feels like there's no there. And so maybe you can help me decipher some of that if there is anything to decipher. I think the game could use a crouch. Crouching is an idea that definitely plays a role in Superhot VR because you're reaching for a lot of things, sometimes on the floor. But I think that would add a more dynamic layer of gameplay and strategy where it's not just throwing, aiming, shooting, turning and moving. It's also maybe you need to stay in one spot and there's a bullet coming toward your head. And one way out of that situation is not moving your body, but crouching. And that would make some moments feel really rewarding. And then sometimes reloading levels can just last a few seconds too long. I wish it was as instant as Celeste.
Yeah.
I wish it was as instant as Sayonara Wild Hearts. It just takes a few seconds too long, I think. I just want to get back in there immediately. And it's just not quite immediate. And then the pausing being non-existent, I wish that was a thing as well. So overall, I think Superhot is inventive, but it's not terribly profound. I think it works best as a series of micro challenges about anticipating and being precise. And as an arcade experience, I found it to be just as fun as the first time I beat it. So I'm going to rate it an 8 out of 10.
That's exactly what I guessed.
Wonderful.
Nice.
Yeah. So again, like a game I like, I think is great, but it's not a masterpiece for me. But, not every game has to be a masterpiece in my mind. So yeah, you talked about some levels being memorable, but you can't really remember everything going on. Did you want to talk about ideas that a certain level explored that you think like were effective just based on the ones you can remember?
Well, I guess the one that what did we call it? The ballroom? Is that what we called it?
Yeah.
It gives you a katana right away. And like up to that point, I'm sort of stuck in the throw things and get guns. And I'm not really focusing on melee weapons and katanas and stuff. So forcing me to use that and experiment with it, or at least strongly encouraging me to use that, sort of changed how I could approach seeing a katana later in the game.
Yeah.
I still leaned more toward trying to find the rifle because,
yes.
it's less margin of error
Right.
there,
More
essentially.
chances, yes.
But I think that creates a memorable experience just because it forced me into a situation that I wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah. So many
Done.
levels don't start that way. And the first level puts a handgun in your hand because the shooting of guns is the bread and butter
Mhm.
of this game. You know,
Mhm.
you can punch, you can dodge things, you can throw things, you can use katanas and things, but it is really just the guns at the forefront.
Yeah.
And so there are micro instances of this all over the game. And I think it's really easy to miss what they're doing with it. Like I think of level 6, it's called jump. You don't know that it's called jump until you go back to chapter select, but it's called jump because the level starts with a car coming right at your face. And the very first thing, you have to jump
Yeah.
to beat this level. You have to, that has to be the first input you make in this level. And so that is great for getting conditioned to knowing where the jump button is. That jump is a thing because you didn't really have to use jump
Right.
in other levels. You could have, but
And this, is a game that easily could be developed without a jump, and you would never think that it needed to be there in the first place.
mhm,
So-
yes. And so I like that it is just kind of subtly teaching me those things. And in that instance, it's especially helpful to get a reminder about the jump because the layout of the jump button is weird on the controller. It's like L2.
I don't remember. Yeah, something
Yeah,
like that.
it's just like, it's something it took me a while to remember what that was. And I've been playing tons of Zelda where jump is, the equivalent of triangle on PlayStation. So
that's a weird jump button too.
so I kept pressing, triangle on PlayStation to try to jump. And that's a me problem. So on the story and meta elements, I mean, do you have any deeper observations or takes on what's going on?
It's so hard because by nature I'm a bit of a contrarian. So whenever someone says something's cool or I should do something, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna do the opposite.
Yeah.
Because I'm edgy or whatever.
Sure.
And so when this introduces obedience to me, I'm like, okay, the next time I can defy the master, I'm gonna try it. But it doesn't matter. You can't
Mhm.
do it. It takes away that agency of being able to make a choice. And so what I took away from it is the illusion of choice is my overarching meta theme. And I don't think they totally nailed illusion of choice. It felt like it was the system, controls you or something. But agency is
Yeah,
complicated in this game.
it is. Because, it happens gameplay wise, it happens story wise. And again, it's just it feels like it wants to swing. It feels like it wants to go somewhere and it just
Mhm.
doesn't let you, the player, do that. And it doesn't really do that with the story. I just didn't find it that deep
Yeah.
of a takeaway.
Yeah.
And it feels like a game that should have a surprise, a WTF moment.
Yeah, it's like a Black Mirror episode, but
Yes.
it didn't nail it.
Yes.
I'm not surprised or confused or disturbed.
I just want kind of a distilled down moral. And I guess what you just laid out could be that, but I was expecting something different, I guess.
Yeah.
And then I was able to do all of the secret terminals, which, a moment ago, you talked about how there's these hints at these secrets
Yeah.
and,
If you're playing a game where you have a file selection system,
Yes.
there's secrets in that game.
right. And this is not the first game to kind of do that we've covered on Underplayed. But I never looked for them on my own, and I don't think I would have been able to find any of these because they're in obscure places. You have to jump through windows in ways you would not expect. There are walls that are fake walls that I never would have.
Boo!
It's pretty dumb. And when you get into these secret areas, the game stops looking like the game that you're seeing because while everything is white and it's not colored realistically, all the environments you're in look realistic layout wise. You're in a parking garage with cars.
Mhm.
You're in an alleyway with dumpsters and everything is logical. You're in a bar, with a pool table.
Right.
But when you start going into these quote unquote outside the boundaries areas, things get really weird. And there's also even like not consistency between the secret areas of all the levels.
Oh.
A lot of them have what look like carnival rides and like palm trees and just like other objects you don't see in the base game. And some of them are just more abstract where I can't even tell what I'm looking at. It's
I
just
mean, that is interesting to me, but
yeah, I mean, there's one area where you just see like a bunch of whales floating in the distance.
what?
Yeah, it's very strange. Or maybe they're dolphins. It's something like that. Then you have to like find these terminals, and sometimes the terminals are just you exit the boundary of the level, and then maybe the terminal is around a corner. But other times you have to do like a kind of a hard platforming challenge to get to a terminal that's like on the underside of a floor of the level, and it's just a terminal like
weird.
stuck in the environment. So it's very inconsistent. They also give you text, how text can flash on screen.
Yeah.
It kind of gives this feeling of like subliminal messaging.
Mm-hmm.
They add more of those in these secret areas that are particular to the secret areas. And they're like breaking the fourth wall a lot. So I found that to be interesting. And then I've played Superhot VR. I played it on the Oculus Quest 2, which is now called the Meta Quest 2. And just for your information, Superhot VR is not just this game in VR. It is
Okay.
actually different levels.
Oh, weird. Okay.
And you can use more weapons. You can like use Uzis, and you can dual wield Uzis. So, you're shooting different guns. You're kind of strategizing differently. And this game, I remember being very exhausting. It's one I played with other people. A friend had a MetaQuest 2, and every time we passed the headset, it's sweaty and we have to wipe it down. We have to like sanitize it and everything. It's a lot of reaching and leaning and crouching. And the next day I was super sore.
Oh my gosh.
Like, yeah. So it's a workout for sure.
Fitness via Superhot.
Yeah. But I also remember it being more challenging to dodge bullets because the perception of depth is a little bit harder, and you're like turning your head in real time.
Mhm.
You're not using these really clean movement of the movements of the stick.
R stick, yeah.
Yes. So, sometimes you would just catch a stray bullet and you wouldn't really understand the boundaries, the hitboxes. But it is like, if you enjoy Superhot, the game, I do recommend, Superhot VR. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on from just doing research is after the success of Superhot, it had a successful Kickstarter. It raised like several $100,000, I want to say. And then the game went on to be this popular indie game. The devs created Superhot Presents, which helps fund smaller indie games. And we've actually heard this name before from last season when I reviewed The Procession to Calvary, because that game is one of the beneficiaries of Superhot Presents. And so that is the publisher of that game. So
Nice.
that very weird, obscure game that I played. And the list, isn't terribly long, but I liked that they could take their success and sort of pay it forward to developers who were in their position once upon a time.
If you're gonna be a big indie, do that.
Yeah, for sure. Did you have any other observations on Superhot?
Oof. No, just that it didn't feel quite how I expected it to. So I was at least surprised and satisfied that it was better than I anticipated.
That's
So
good.
That's good.
That's good. That's a great positive note to end on. That is our review of Superhot. You can play it on PC, Mac, Linux, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. DiscoCola rated it a 6. I rated it an 8. That's the end of this episode of Underplayed. You can find more of our episodes at kzum.org/underplayed and on common podcast services like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Our music was composed by Jack Rodenberg. Our art comes from Onimochi. Underplayed is on Twitter at underplayedpod. You can find me on Twitter at Bopo, that's BO_PO. And you can also check out Bopo on the GG app, where you can see my game lists and my reviews that I like to do for all the games we play on Underplayed.
And I am at DiscoCola on Twitch and Twitter, and now actually on the GG app. I have my top 100 list. Still needs some tweaking, but it is there.
Yes, we each have our top 100 lists, so check those out if you're curious about our tastes.
And Underplayed Pod has a Twitch channel where we've been playing Cuphead and hopefully more co-op games in the future.
Yes. Next time, we will have 2 more secret games to review, and our featured game will be Abzu, an adventure game developed by Giant Squid Studios. Until then, everyone, keep on playing.